Later, subject to their other commitments, they can have a cup of tea. Quite possibly. Order. I have to notify the House, in accordance with the Royal Assent Act 1967, that Her Majesty has signified her royal assent to the following Act: Northern Ireland Welfare Reform Act 2015. Order. We come now to the 10-minute rule motion, for which the Honourable Member for Enhelian and Yar has been patiently waiting. Mr. Angus Brendan McNeill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. An excellent pronunciation as ever. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to establish a mechanism by which the Scottish Government, the Scottish Parliament and a majority of members representing Scottish constituencies may jointly determine further powers and responsibilities to be devolved to Scotland and for connected purposes. Madam Deputy Speaker, this House has decided that there is a need for English votes for English laws, evil. And now, to keep modernising the House of Commons, where the SNP are always keen to play a constructive role, but more importantly to put Scotland first, it is now time to have Scots votes for Scots laws. Thistle. And as an aid memoir, it sounds almost like thistle. The foundation of my argument and the call for Scots votes for Scots laws, Thistle, comes from a great promiser of devolution who said that if Scotland wants to stay inside the United Kingdom, then all options of devolution are there and all are possible. The promiser of that was, of course, the Prime Minister. But since then, the SNP laid out 80+ amendments to the report stage alone of the Scotland Bill, and none were accepted. Not quite all options, and very far from all possible. But the SNP are, as I have said, here to help. Given that, as I will show, Westminster has failed Scotland, and it's time to move to a point beyond where the crumbs are promised on the table, or we plead for crumbs on the table, instead to where we are given the keys to the larder, to where Scotland's powers have been deposited since 1707. So that, in line with the Prime Minister's words, Scotland can choose to take the powers, fulfilling the PM's solemn promise broadcast to Scotland just 8 days before the referendum. All options of devolution are there, and all are possible. This was the premise on which the Scottish people voted for the other option to yes. It was not a no vote. Because remember, by the time of the vote, Madam Deputy Speaker, the three amigos, as they were dubbed in Scotland, galloped from this chamber to Scotland, and the referendum was between yes and lots of powers, even a vow thrown in, and or as close to federalism as possible. So to help, I propose an amendment to the Scotland Act 1988, whereby devolution to Scotland occurs when, firstly, Her Majesty's Scottish Government wants the powers. Secondly, the Scottish Parliament ratifies the Scottish Government's wish. And thirdly, for a majority of Scottish constituency MPs at Westminster to agree to that. And these Scottish votes for Scottish laws, Thistle, would complement evil in this chamber. A devolution triple lock, but with an energetic drive. I wouldn't include defence, by the way, but given the Scottish Government is already moving in foreign affairs, it would seem sensible to let that option be there if chosen by Scotland, so we can improve our trading situation in the nation. Some will ask why I want to do this. Well, the current situation with the latest Scotland Bill has been described to me by an eminent independent legal mind in Scotland as more of a miscellaneous provisions act. Or in other words, it's a burach. In fact, this is Westminster's third attempt to tell Scotland, you have had all you are getting of your powers back, now be happy and stop bothering us again. Well, this has twice clearly been unsatisfactory, and it is looking unsatisfactory again. Indeed, the House of Lords would seem to support my point that the Scotland Bill is already failing in regard to Scotland. On Friday last week, newspaper headlines had Lords demand halt to the Scotland Bill, committee slams detail on fiscal framework, with a Lords committee saying there has been a lack of attention to detail or principles, the upshot being that the bill is impossible for them to scrutinise. In Scotland, the feeling is certainly that Westminster must do better, but it has had 3 chances and it has failed. It has failed 3 times. 3 times. The definition of madness is to continue doing the same thing and expecting different results. Therefore, to save us from the well-meaning blundering of Westminster, and to paraphrase Churchill, we in Scotland feel that Westminster's virtues are worse than the vices of 2,000 men. We need an amendment to the Scotland Act 1998 to provide us with a solution to the situation. The solution outlined earlier is based on experience, practice, and informed by conversations and observation. One of which happened on the 8th of April last year, When Uachtar an Nahéireann, Neil D. O'Higgins, Irish President Michael D. Higgins came and addressed both houses of this Parliament, an historic first state visit by an Irish head of state to the UK since the formation of both these equally aged states, if in slightly different guises, the Republic of Ireland and the UK back in 1922. The experience I witnessed was a real joy. To set the scene, after the Irish President's address, I had the good fortune over at the Lords to be in what is known as the robing room and was speaking to the President in a healthy mixture of Scottish Gaelic and Irish Gaelic, when who interrupted our conversation with the coarser Saxon tongue but the Prime Minister. His words were, however, of honey. He told the President of the magnificent relations he saw between the UK and Ireland, the stuff that was in all the papers at the time, and how the relationship hardly needed a nudge. It was honey, sweetness, light, add your own mellifluous superlatives. The contrast with the respect for independent, thriving Ireland and the attitude to Scotland, even then pre-referendum and especially now, could not be more different. Contrast a relationship of relaxed joy from Westminster towards Ireland to one of grudging grievance that Westminster has about treating Scotland the same way. Example tells us it could be otherwise in the British Isles. Between Ireland, Scotland, England and Wales is positioned Eilean Vanning, as it is known in its own Gaelic language, or the Isle of Man in the coarser tongue. On Man, with a population of 85,000, not only have they a parliament that historically dwarfs Westminster in antiquity and is only rivaled by Iceland and the Faroes for the scope of history, those places of course being linked by the pioneering early but unlikely lawmakers, the Viking Norse, who had followed more the rule of law, it was noted at the time, than the rule of a king. The independence of the UK, Ireland, the Isle of Man vis-à-vis one another has definitely led to a higher GDP in these islands than would exist had they all been one state, regardless of where the capital was and decisions made Dublin, Edinburgh, London, or indeed the Tynwald at Eilean Vanning. Hence my call for a sensible step to enable Scotland to move forward as the Scottish society sees fit, as the Manx and Irish societies already do, not held back by the ball and chain of continued Westminster failure of process and, of course, policy from a governing party here at Westminster that was not chosen by 90% of the Scottish electorate. Let us look at a better example for Scotland, away from the crumbs at the table, but at the open door with the keys to the larder. Let us look at a model between the Faroe Islands and Denmark, a model for London to aspire to now. It is worth, however, to recap on what we currently do and redo, to the exasperation, as I have said, of the Lords and indeed the Scottish people. When devolution came into the UK in 1999 and to Scotland, after decades of a chip-on-the-shoulder Tory resistance, it was devolution driven by Labour devolving departments that they thought wouldn't present a problem: health, education, transport. This was, as it was at the time, with Labour ruling supreme at Holyrood and Westminster, the heady days of Blair. Things can only get better, the days before Iraq. Now the next proposed devolution is fragmented to keep hold of bits of powers, bits and pieces in departments and responsibilities here and there. Some welfare, some tax, so we can lower air passenger duty but not benefit from the extra revenues that such a change in APD will bring to Scotland. We can have parts of welfare, but we have to deal with the benefit cuts to the backs of the poorest. In essence, it still comes from the table we get given, even if we cajole enough. Let us instead make the relationship mature, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let us fulfil the words of the Prime Minister. If Scotland wants to stay inside the United Kingdom, then all options of devolution are there, and all are possible. Turn the telescope, and instead of crumbs from the table, let's open the door to the larder. It's exactly what Copenhagen does to the Faroes. With regard to powers belonging to the Faroes in Denmark, the Faroese can take them or leave them as they want. They have chosen to take everything except defence and justice. For example, the Finance Minister of the Faroe Islands, Christina Hafos, has the powers within her jurisdiction of 50,000, powers equivalent to the Chancellor's Exchequer here for 60 million. And given the Faroese unemployment rate is lower than the UK, she is arguably more successful. Her party colleague in the coalition government, the Fisheries Minister, Høgni Hoydal, does not deal with Denmark and fisheries, but the entire European Union, Iceland and Norway, as they decide the fate of North East Atlantic fisheries. Because while Faroes is in Denmark, it is not in the EU. Size doesn't matter, as 50,000 Faroese often getting the better of 500 million in the EU and fisheries proves. It is not a case of asking Denmark or justifying policies to Copenhagen. No, it's a case of deciding with their own people at their own parliament of both the powers and the policies. This, Madam Deputy Speaker, is known as normality. So let us learn, let us turn the telescope. Let's help the Prime Minister fulfil his words of all options of devolution are there and all are possible. Let's cast aside repeated failures of Westminster. Let the settled will of the Scottish people be driven from Scotland. Let us trust the people. Scots votes for Scots laws.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
No, him.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald. Stuart C. MacDonald. Stuart Blair Donaldson. Stuart Hosey. Carol Monaghan. Dr. Paul Monaghan. Callum Kerr. Callum McCaig. Alex Salmond. Angus Robertson. Brendan O'Hara. And myself, Angus Brendan McNeill.
Mr. Angus Brendan McNeill.
Scotland Act 1998 Amendment Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 11th of March 2016.
Friday the 11th of March 2016. As we come to the childcare bill, I have to remind the House that Mr. Speaker has certified clauses 2, 4 and 6 of the Childcare Bill, Lord's Understanding Order number 83J, in relation to England. I further remind the House that this does not affect proceedings in the debate on second reading, or indeed in committee or at report stage. After report stage, Mr. Speaker will consider the bill again for